So now that we start the recording for this session, welcome everybody to our training from singleness to oneness, embracing the marriage designed by God. We are on session number 9 today. So this will be the last session of the training. After this session, I'm going to start meeting with each one of you individually to highlight things that the whole process and homework reveal perhaps that need to be addressed, or things that you want to discuss about your relationship but in private. So this is what's going to follow up after this week. But today we have our last online meeting. And just to give you a little big picture again, kind of refresh the content, we studied that when we talk about marriage, we think of it as oneness, and is that journey from thinking single and then start thinking oneness, and that requires that we dissect the whole system into spiritual, emotional, physical, and legal categories. So we went through all of those. Today we are starting the legal category, which deals with the boundaries for marriage and divorce. And that is the section we're going to be covering today. But before we do that, I want to do a review, okay? See how you've done so far through the whole thing. So first, we asked the question, what model are you using? And we realized that everybody starts with a model. We talked about the partnership, the 50-50, and the oneness model. Okay, so are you using the oneness model now? I hope so. Next one, we asked, which structure are you using? Do you have the macho structure, the feminine structure, or the oneness structure? And that determines how we interact in the relationship. Then we asked, which compass are you using? The happiness, the success, or the service compass? And we discovered that the couple that experiences oneness uses the service compass. They are living to serve God primarily, whether single or married. Then we asked another question. Do you make your spouse feel accepted? And we realized that the way we interact with each other always will have the difference between our expectations and the reality. And the goal is that we change the expectations in any area that has to do with personality or preferences to match the reality, and we make the person feel accepted. However, when there are issues of character that God says they need to change, then we confront them speaking truth in love to change reality to match God's expectations, right? And that's how we deal with acceptance. Then we asked another question. Do you know how to solve conflicts? And we realized that most people address conflicts in a reactive way, which is based on being prideful and foolish. But instead, we need to learn the proactive way, which requires for us to be humble and wise. And the question is how we are going to solve this situation. And until we don't have a solution, we don't move on. Then we asked another question. Do you know how to speak from the heart? And we discovered that many couples move to a superficial direction in which they become very distant because they never know how to communicate in an intimate way. They only talk about business and that's it. They do not care really about each other in an intimate way. So we learn how we develop that gift of knowing how to communicate from the heart, speaking intentionally to move from the surface to deeper things. That brings the relationship much closer emotionally. Then we asked another question. Are you the best friend your spouse can have? And we discovered that our spouse is not just our spouse, but we are meant to be the closest friends that the spouse will ever have. And we are called to be an instrument of restoration, of companionship, and loyal support to each other. And we realize that when the Bible talks about those 3 characteristics, it says that's the 3 core, the 3 strengths that are not easily broken. So that made you start thinking about yourself as not just a spouse, but as a friend to your spouse. After that, we asked one more question on the emotional section, which was, which financial system are you using? The partnership, the 50-50, the macho system, or the oneness system? And we went through all the principles the Bible talked about in how we think of money. And we see it just as another way of serving God. And we looked at the M&M test to see how generous we are. Then we move from there to start thinking about physical oneness. And we asked two questions. Is your marriage sexually satisfying? And we realized that many couples live in sexual frustration because they don't understand God's design for sexuality, but also they are not intentionally building a marriage that is sexually satisfying. So we went through 10 different principles there and things that the Bible brings together into thinking about this dimension of our marriage. And the other side of the coin here, we also ask the question, how are you protecting your marriage from adultery? And we realize that there are very different perspectives about adultery in different couples. But the people that think that this is normal, acceptable, or that will never happen to me are missing the mark, because God says, no, you have the potential for it. Therefore, you have to intentionally build a relationship in a way that prevents that from happening. And we look carefully about at some erosion that can happen in the relationship and factors that can contribute to that challenge of adultery in the relationship. So those were all the questions that we've asked so far. As you can see, lots of different content that addresses so many different dimensions of the relationship. Before we enter into session 9 today and get deeper into it, I wanted to ask you, since it's our last session, how has the training helped you so far? Is there any concept that you found yourself like remembering as you were going through a situation that you thought, oh yeah, we talked about this? So, or something that was eye-opening that even till now you remember, oh yeah, I had never thought about that and it was so helpful. So from your experience so far, from this review, how has it helped you until this point? So let's start with Trey and Eli.
All right, you got this, Eli.
No, it's you. It's you. He'll answer.
Oh, he'll answer. Well, pretty much what we're, and I guess just for anyone else who watches the recording and for everyone else in the meeting, but we're actually telling Pablo this last night, telling him that we're very appreciative that we've taken this class, especially before we get married, because we feel like there's some things we probably would have learned the hard way had we not been here. But just overall, I mean, it's helped us look at situations in our relationship, even if we were having like disagreements or even arguments, you know, being able to approach them from a perspective that we're on the same team and we're trying to accomplish the same goal, and to try to understand what the other person is saying and not be defensive, and just like all these different aspects that have helped us already.
Good. So that's good. So in your case, it's been preventative. You know, it's preparing you to
yeah.
And hopefully you will have much more of a strong foundation as you get married this summer. That's great. In your case, Brandon and Hannah.
Start first. I'll go first. Going through the review, I think I kind of mentioned this last week. I think one of the key words through even a lot of the slides you showed just now, intentional, or basically intentionality. So that is a very strong theme that I think carries throughout all these, and carries out through just a relationship and communication. So being very intentional in what you say to each other, how you react to each other, So that's not something that I've always been very good at in the past. But through this process and through some other things that we're doing, I think that that's really one of the key core concepts, even though it's not specific to any of the sessions.
Yeah.
It's kind of like carried out through all of them. So I think that's been one of the big things for me.
Yeah, so it made you realize that you cannot experience oneness unless you're intentional about it, right? As you were talking, you know, the picture that came to mind is losing weight. It's like gaining weight is very easy, but losing is very intentional, right?
Yeah.
And suddenly you start feeling, it's like, man, my pants are too tight. You know, when did I get, you know, this bigger, you know? And then you realize that to lose it, you have to really work hard at it and to keep it that way. So the same thing with your marriage is going to be, you cannot let your guard down, because the moment you do, you're going to start drifting apart, right? Hannah, you wanted to add something to that?
Yes. To me, it's, you know, we learned a very hard way. We have the whole year of struggle and because of the sections that we learned from you, that I have seen many mistakes that we have made in the past. And that's why we fail in the first year. And but it's okay, we fail and then we learn now. So and some of them like eye-opening to me too, like some of the notes that I have from other sections that I didn't really know about at all. So yeah, so it's very helpful.
So you can compare the first year to after the first year with the training, seeing how, looking back, it's like, oh, we were doing it the wrong way, and now you have more clarity of what the right way is.
Yeah.
And you can see the effects of it. That's good.
We have a lot of mistakes. All the mistakes that some of the cases that you have for the case study or something. Sometimes we should laugh at each other and say, "Now what exactly was?"
Yeah, and you can see that the mistakes are very common, you know, for all of us. It's like we naturally go that way without realizing it. That's good. So it shows you how relevant some of the different concepts have been and the changes they can make. Let's go with Kelly and Jack. In what way has it been helpful for you?
Firstly, thank you so much, Pastor Pablo, to take like 10 weeks to walk through the whole course with us. And also, it's really, nice presentations with all the case studies, and especially for the those like celebrities, like the I'm second. Yeah, those things are quite relevant to each topics and quite insightful to have some witness to show us in the real life people just lead by Jesus and just find the right courses. Yeah. And for us, since Kelly and I took like Watermark premarital courses before, that is like 8-week course, and that's in class. So this time is online, and we only have like 3 couples and Rachel with us, so like more intimate, like feeling. So and so we can have more discussions, and also like since we have longer time, and some of the topics can you can explain more to us to make sure we can understand thoroughly. So I think it's really good, and Kelly and I agree that because recently it's a little bit messy, and we were thinking about we should revisit and watch those videos recording again and finish those homework together, and then can fully utilize this course to guide our marriage down the road.
And the advantage of having the recordings available now, Zoom, and you can revisit, and having the notes in PDF, right? So that will help you revisit and do the homeworks together. And yeah, that's very nice. Kelly, you wanted to add anything to that?
I think all of them are very helpful, and a lot of points that are very new to us, but those are very true as well. And we know that, you know, building a good marriage is intentional too. And then, you know, we have the natural tendency to like to either to drift apart or just be trapping a lot of like really small like day-to-day stuff. And so a lot of things is very good to know at the beginning of our marriage. So super helpful. Yes.
Good. Yeah, so that you don't make the minor things major, right? And stay focused on what matters the most.
Yes.
That's good. And also, as you mentioned, Jack, having the videos of different stories, it makes you realize how the challenges that we all face are common to marriage, you know, itself. So sometimes we may feel that we are the only ones struggling with something, and it's always good to remember that no, we're not the only ones. This is life, right? And that's why I love the relevance of the gospel and how the Bible talks about, you know, the core inner things rather than superficial, right? Instead of staying on the religious level of ritual, you know, it really talks about the heart and the things that really matter the most. So that's good. I'm glad that worked out for you. And Rachel, how has it helped you?
It reminds me, after the quick review, reminds me of a saying in the, you know, in the novel Anna Karenina. It says happy families resemble one another, but each unhappy family is miserable in its own ways. So with these 4 dimensions, I feel like it can at least have, you know, a combination or different arrangements, like 16 different types here already. So there's so many ways that can go wrong, but also God's way is that resembles one other. So God's way is the one that can work, right, for all happy families. So and then also a lot of the concept here, realize that I have a different perspective because the life stage, a lot of that applies to my relationship with God as well. So it's not only helping me to prepare for the future, but also help me reflect the relationship with God, with the communication, the campus, or the different view of my relationship with God as well. So it's super helpful in that sense to me.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, because it's true. Many of the concepts apply beyond marriage itself, right? It's about relationships, whether it be with other people or with God. That's true. So as we had said in the past, you know, we have all the stages represented, right? From singleness to engaged to newly married to over a year of marriage. So at each stage, the concepts apply in a different way. But I hope, and as we prayed, that God will give you wisdom to know how to apply these things to your life. So we are going to talk about how to build a divorce-proof marriage today. But after this review and thinking through all the different dimensions, kind of like a refresher, I want to share this story with you, which is also from I Am Second. This couple, Nathan and Katie Parks. As you listen to their story, you are going to see the struggles they went through, but you will also be able to start discerning from, you know, these different dimensions that we just reviewed. It's like, what were the things, kind of, if these were symptoms, right? If this couple came to me with their story of saying, this is where we are at, you can immediately start thinking, by listening to their story, how they are struggling in the different areas and the combination of these things, where it led them. So let me switch here quickly. I'm going to do a new share. And I'm also going to switch the sound. So give me 1 second. Okay, can you hear okay? Yeah, okay, so here we go. Oh, it's quiet. Let me see. Something not right. Oh, no. Okay, let's try that.
The morning I woke up and had to tell Nathan what I had done. That was probably the most difficult day of my life. Just to see the hurt in somebody's eyes that you really care about.
I just sat back and took a deep, deep breath because I'd been doing the same thing. My expectations was that Katie would pretty much cook and clean the house because that's what I was brought up to believe.
I always expected Nathan to be always loving me and paying attention to me and helping me and sharing in responsibilities.
I wanted to go to school, and she wanted to go to school also. And in the beginning, I did what I could to, I guess, squish her dream so that mine would prevail.
You get so confused and wrapped up in expectations that it's just easy to kind of go astray.
We pretty much didn't care how the other person felt. She was going off and hanging out with some of her friends, at the bar or doing whatever, and I was hanging out with my friends, Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday night.
Our house began to be kind of silently angry. I kind of learned to fight quietly. I never wanted it to be over. I always wanted to be married to Nathan. But I guess I just didn't know how to bring it back and to make it what it needed to be. I was lost. I just didn't know how to make it work. We've probably been married about 3.5 years, and I found myself having an affair with a man from work.
My part was pretty secretive. She didn't have any clue what I was doing. Mine was just a couple of one-night stands, which were emotionally meaningless to me. Hers, on the other hand, was more emotional than it was anything. And we were just driving each other apart into somebody else's arms.
God put this incredible conviction on me, and I couldn't continue with it, so I ended it. About a week or two after I had ended it, a friend of ours had come to talk to us, to invite us to church.
God had been speaking to us, for a couple of weeks before that. About it seems like everywhere I turned, somebody was asking me, are you guys in church? And when we got there, it was almost as if Christ just walked to our pew in the aisle and just slapped us both across the face and said, I've brought you here, I've walked you to the front door, what more do you want?
I still had not told him what I had done, and about 3 months into going to church, I woke up one morning.
She woke up one morning just bawling, and I asked her what was wrong, and she said, I can't tell you, I can't tell you.
It was though God told me that in order for me to be able to move on, to be able to grow, and to be able to repair our relationship, that I was going to have to tell him.
In the back of my mind, I knew exactly what she had to tell me. I just didn't know who or when or why.
It was like he assured me that it was going to be hard, but if I would do this, then he would make our relationship wonderful beyond even my comprehension.
So we sat in my truck, and she spilled her guts and told me everything about it, and told her that Jesus had been telling her that she needs to tell me this. And at that moment, Christ told me, tell your wife what you've been doing, because you two can forgive each other, and I can make your marriage something awesome. She reacted completely different than I thought she would. She just looked at me and said, you know, I forgive you.
Without Jesus, I think that we would be divorced right now.
We're not moving laterally to each other. We're moving centrally towards God, and that's bringing us close together. And that's something that I love from the bottom of my heart.
The kind of miracle that God did for us is more than words could even express. I can look in the mirror and I can be proud of what God has done for us.
Okay, so now you were able to see their story, and let me switch here. You were able to see their story. Can you hear me okay now? Yeah. Could you detect at any moments of the story like glimpses of concepts that we've discussed in the past? Like what, for instance? Anybody, unmute your mic and what things popped up?
Reality and expectations.
Right, so they had very clear expectations of what it was supposed to be, and it was not working because they were not fulfilling each other's expectations. What else? How did they solve conflicts?
She said they were like silently angry. So it sounded like she gave him like the cold shoulder and they just didn't discuss things.
Yeah, so they were doing the silent treatment, right? And yet inside they were very angry, and that was driving them emotionally apart. How did he describe her affair? He said, in contrast to my affair, was much physical and didn't mean anything emotionally, but in contrast, what was her affair like?
Hers was more emotional.
Right, it was an emotional connection, right? Because she was looking for that emotional connection. Remember, we talked about an affair doesn't start in the bedroom. Typically, it's an expression of something else that's building. So you could see that there are so many of these glimpses of things that are happening. What kind of structure did they have for the marriage at the beginning from his perspective? What was the role of the wife?
I think he used his macho structure.
Yeah, the macho structure, right? Right. You clean the house, you cook, that's it. And what was his reaction to her desires to study? Because they both wanted to study. So what did he do for that?
He squashed it.
Yeah. So they made every effort to squash her dreams. Yeah, because that's not your role. Your role is to stay in the house. I'm the one that's gonna study and go get a job. So she says that she always envisioned herself being married to him. But at the same time, she recognizes, she says, if it wasn't because of Jesus, we would be divorced today. So that assertion leads us to what we're going to be talking about today. It's a reality, okay? The concept of divorce in marriage. And in this session of building a divorce-proof marriage, we're going to ask this question: how are you protecting your marriage from divorce? Because the reality is that most couples that enter marriage, they do not enter marriage wanting to get divorced. They're into marriage because they really want to have a good relationship. They just do not know how to build it. But many of these couples that enter with the desire to build a good marriage end up being divorced. So today, the percentage of couples that actually remain married is lower than the number of couples that get divorced. So in part of understanding the answer to this question, how are you protecting your marriage from divorce? We have to ask a couple of other questions that go together. What is your view on divorce? You know, that's where we need to start.
Excuse me,
Because
Pastor Pablo.
what is it?
Can you reshare your screen again? There are some black blocks the screen, so we cannot see the full screen.
Okay.
Probably when you reshare it.
Can others see the black
Oh,
box?
okay, so let me stop sharing, and I'm gonna share again.
Because it's covering like
Can
quarter
you
of
see that?
No, it's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me go back here. Okay. So session 9, building a divorce-proof marriage. We're going to be asking the question: how are you protecting your marriage from divorce? And for that, we ask the first question, which is, how do you see divorce? One of the things you're going to discover is that the perspective about divorce are very different depending on the couple. Some couples start with let me move some things here around a little bit before I keep going so I can see clearly. Okay, that's better. That's better. Okay. So some couples see divorce as the first option. They get married, they do the vows, and they just go through the marriage and the wedding ceremony. But in the back of their minds, kind of like that little disclaimer that is with small letters at the end of a contract, they say, with you until death do us part, except if this, and I'm gonna get out of here, So many couples enter marriage with the conviction that they're gonna exit that marriage whenever they don't feel happy, and they're just gonna be out of it. And that perspective is very common. In fact, some marriages have lasted, just even a few hours. Some couples have gotten divorced after 72 hours, less than a week together, and they get divorced. So it's just amazing to see how many couples take this exit so quickly, and they really think, yeah, I'm gonna walk out any moment. That is very popular. Okay, but from there you go to the other side of the spectrum, where you have couples that think, no, this is never an option. And typically those couples are people that have a more conservative background or religious convictions, and they were told since young age, that divorce is just wrong, and it's just like almost like the unforgivable sin. And therefore, the moment you are married, the only option out of marriage is until one of you die, and then you can be free after that, but there's no other way. So this person thinks that divorce is always wrong. There's never a justifiable reason for it. And it also thinks that being divorced is always a state of being that is sinful. So you're always just in a kind of like in an acceptable state of being, because you're going completely against God's will. So in some contexts, therefore, whenever you meet a divorced person, that divorced person feels treated like a second-class citizen. They feel like there's something wrong with them, and many people treat them like that. So then they struggle with social relationships as well. So in extreme cases, people in this category, they accept behaviors of physical abuse and emotional abuse and other things, and they never walk away from it because they don't believe they can. So these two perspectives on divorce, they are driven by something that is not the right thing to drive you. In the first case, what the person is being driven is by a sense of selfishness and convenience. I'm gonna get out of here the moment I feel like it, you know, for whatever reason, I get out of here. So the relationship is built in selfishness, and often that couple is going to threaten whenever they have arguments. It's like, I'm gonna divorce you, you know, and they talk about divorce like, you know, you're talking about daily bread, and they never think much about it. It's very selfish, very self-centered. While the other, when they never see it as an option, typically is driven by fear. Is the sense of, you know, I need to stay here because if I don't stay here, then what will happen to me? What will people think of me? What will God think of me? And they end up staying in the relationship out of fear rather than out of love for the person they marry. So both are enslaving. And at the same time, both perspectives do not reflect what the Bible teaches about this topic. In contrast, the couple that has oneness and that also has a biblical understanding of these things sees divorce as an extreme option. I do not know if you have gone to a museum or some of these stores, perhaps at the mall. You walk in and they have this sign that says emergency exit only. Door must remain closed at all times, okay? And they designed that door right there to be used, but rarely. It was meant as a safety precaution. You know, you see it in the airplane as well. So what happens when you are flying and you try to open the emergency exit door when it's not an emergency? What will happen? Oh, you're gonna be in trouble because that's illegal. You see, there has to be an emergency to really open that door. Otherwise, it is illegal to open that door. And that's how this couple sees divorce. They acknowledge the existence of it, but they acknowledge that it is meant as an extreme option for extreme circumstances. And therefore, they are never thinking of opening that door or building their marriage with the goal of opening that door. But they do not take the marriage, therefore, for granted because they never want to open that door. So even though they acknowledge it as an option, they never want to be in a position in which they have to take that option. And that couple, therefore, lives their marriage with intentionality. And this is the word again that we talked about earlier that Brandon brought up. You have in buildings, you know, these emergency exit doors that are only meant to be used in case of extreme situations. And to prevent some of those things, you have drills, you know, and if you went to school and you ever had a drill, you know, drill for a fire, you know, and it's like, it's not real, we're just practicing in case it happens, you know, and they are preparing themselves for the unthinkable, you know. So that is the mindset here that kind of captures the essence of what the perspective of divorce is in the Bible. And we're going to look at it a little bit more. But you can see, therefore, that these three perspectives differ completely in how they think of divorce. One is being driven by selfishness and convenience. The other one is being driven by fear. But the third one is being driven by love. See, you are intentionally protecting each other and protecting your marriage so that door will never have to be open. Now, let's take a look at 3 biblical concepts that summarize what the Bible talks about this. And there's more to it, but these are kind of like the 3 main highlights that will summarize in general what the Bible says. The first thing, or the first conviction from the scriptures, is that God hates divorce. And this is very clearly stated in the Old Testament. There's a prophet called Malachi in the Old Testament, the first half of the Bible. And God asks Malachi to confront the nation and the people that were supposed to be serving God, because they were not really living for God. And they have become very religious, but a bunch of hypocrites. They had rituals and things, but their hearts were completely far from God, and therefore their private lives were also very inconsistent with a life that loves God. So throughout the book of Malachi, he confronts the nation and the religious leaders in many different ways. But one of the things that he confronts them with is their attitude about divorce, because they have been practicing divorce like it had become like a common practice. And this is what Malachi tells them. Another thing you do, I told you there were several things, and this is another one in the list. Another thing you do, you flood the Lord's altar with tears. You weep and wail because he no longer pays attention to your offerings or accept them with pleasure from your hands. So they're feeling like, God, we don't feel close to you. It sounds like there's disconnect here, and they are trying to increase the religious, experience and intensity of it by becoming very emotional about it. And it's not working. So in verse 14, it says, and you ask why? Why is God not paying attention to your prayers and stuff? And this is what it says. It is because the Lord is acting as a witness between you and the wife of your youth, because you have broken faith with her, though she is your partner, the wife of your marriage covenant. Has not the Lord made them one? In flesh and spirit, they are his. And why one? Well, because he was seeking godly offspring. So guard yourself in your spirit and do not break faith with the wife of your youth. I hate divorce, says the Lord God of Israel. And I hate a man's covering himself with violence, as well as with his garment, says the Lord Almighty. So guard yourself in your spirit and do not break faith. So it's very, very direct, approach here. God is saying, look, you have become basically a bunch of hypocrites. You are coming to church, and doing all the religious stuff and praying and being emotional about it. But when you go home, you're completely mistreating your wife. And you are divorcing your wives, and that's a very violent act. And that's not what I intended for your marriage. He says, don't you know that I created them to be one? And one of the reasons why I created marriage as oneness was because a result of that oneness was going to be children, and I wanted godly offspring. And one of the things that happens is that whenever couples get divorced, who are the ones that suffer the most? The kids. The kids suffer in so many different ways, and they have to grow with those wounds. And as they grow older, some of them are able to address those wounds and heal from them. Others have long-lasting effects. And God says, look, the way you are living your marriage is affecting the godly offspring. And then he tells them, you want to know my opinion about divorce? You want to know my opinion about what you're doing? I'll tell you, I hate it. So What you get from Malachi is that God did not create marriage to be ended by divorce. That was not his intent. And whenever a marriage ends with divorce, he has a strong opinion about that. He says, I hate divorce. So that's the first thing that we know. Do we know what God thinks about divorce? Yes. Do we know how he feels about it? Yes. He has a very clear opinion for it. But this is not the only thing that the Bible says about it. We're going to go to the second thing. And the second conviction that the Bible talks about this is that divorce is a proactive measure, a protective measure against the destructive power of a sinful heart. And Jesus talked about divorce just like Malachi talked about divorce, but he talked about divorce from a different angle. There was a conversation that Jesus was having with the religious leaders that came to him with a very tricky question. They wanted him to be in a position where whatever he was going to say was going to put him at odds with one of the political leaders and perhaps end up being killed like John the Baptist had been. So they were being very tricky and they tried to corner him. And this is what they asked him in Matthew chapter 19. Some Pharisees came to him to test him. They asked, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? Pay attention to the question. They're not asking, is it legal to get divorced? They're asking, is it legal to divorce his wife for any and every reason? So for whatever reason, because that's how they were practicing divorce during the time of Jesus. If I wasn't happy with the way my wife cooked, then I could divorce her because I wasn't happy with her. They were just divorcing for whatever, any reason. And Jesus answers, haven't you read, he replied, that at the beginning, the Creator made them male and female and said, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let man not separate. Now you are familiar with this passage because this was the foundation for oneness, right? This is where Jesus says, marriage was meant to be a change of identity from two to one. Now there's oneness. They are no longer two. And haven't you read that that's how God created marriage and that's what he intended for marriage? So he's telling them, no, God did not create marriage to be ended on divorce. Just like Malachi said, right? God hates divorce. So then they asked him this question. Why then, they asked, did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away? Because in the Old Testament law, in the Mosaic law, which is called the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, there's a category that allowed for divorce to happen. And they're asking him, it's like, Jesus, we don't understand. You're saying that, God doesn't want divorce, but then why does the law say that it's okay to get divorced? But then this is what Jesus replies. He says, well, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard. But it was not this way from the beginning. I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for marital unfaithfulness and marries another woman commits adultery. So it says where Jesus says, look, yes, you're right. The law does say that you can get divorced. But what you don't understand is that that's not what God intended from the beginning. God did not create marriage to be ended on divorce. But the only reason why he allowed for divorce was because of one reality. And what is that reality? He says there. The hearts of people were hard. The Bible talks about the sinful nature, about the sinful tendencies, about how our hearts can lead us to behave and do things that are completely ungodly. And that's where it all comes together and makes sense. Let me ask you this way. When the architect that built that museum to be able to host these amazing events and collections, included in that plan, the floor plan, a door that was called an emergency exit. Did he intend, or was his desire, that the building that he was going to build would be destroyed by a fire? Was that his desire? Was that his intent? You say, of course not. The architect did not build the building with the goal that was going to be destroyed by a fire. But did that wise architect know that a fire was a possibility? You would say, yeah. And because that wise architect knew that a fire was a possibility, he knew that he had to put in that building an emergency exit. But was his desire that that emergency exit would be ever used? You would say, no. I mean, he did not want that building to be destroyed by a fire. So ideally, that door would never have to be used. God is like that architect. He is the architect of marriage. And when he designed marriage, he did not desire that marriage was going to be ended by divorce. It was not like that from the beginning, Jesus said. However, just like a wise architect put that emergency exit right there, Jesus says God allowed it. He put it in there in the legal code because he knew that sometimes the heart of a person can be so hard that for the one that is married to that individual, to be able to have an emergency exit to get out of that relationship is the least damaging situation for that person. It's like a lifesaver. So that's why that person put that in there, the emergency exit. That's why Jesus says, you are thinking you can divorce your wife for any and whatever reason. And many of them were divorcing a wife in order to marry the other one. So Jesus confronts that and he says, no, you are completely misusing that emergency exit. This was meant for something like, if your wife was unfaithful to you, then you could, get out of there. We're talking about really serious things. Now, just because she didn't cook a nice meal for you, that's not a reason to take that exit. So what Jesus does is that he acknowledges three important things. First, that God hates divorce. He didn't create marriage to be ended with divorce. Secondly, that God still, though, created an emergency exit because he knew that the possibility of a fire was there. And therefore, he put it in there as a safeguard for the person that is being affected by that dysfunctional relationship. Rachel, you have a question.
Yes, Pastor Pablo, I can imagine the concept of the emergency exit is super helpful when I explain to non-believers the concept of divorce. The question I can imagine they're asking back is, what is a fire, right? So from this verse, from the scripture, does it say that marital unfaithfulness is the only fire, that the door can be opened, or it's a principle based, more to say that anything you think that it shows hearts, people show sinners hard hearts?
Right, and that's a very good question, and it will be answered on the next and on the third principle. So that's really good. Okay, because yeah, there's more to it than just this, right? We're talking about what does the Bible say. Now, this is why it's important to know the scriptures, because if we only read Malachi, right, you would not know that there was an emergency exit. Once you read Jesus, it's like, oh, it becomes a little bit clearer. Jesus explains it in a way, it's like, okay, so it is allowable. But there's more to it. We're reading in the next section. Let me just mention one more thing. One of the things that for translating the New Testament from Greek to English, one of the things that is helpful, it was helpful for me to understand, was that there is an aspect of intent that Jesus also addresses, because this is not the only passage that Jesus talks about this. But there was an aspect of intent. I am divorcing this person in order to marry this person. And when Jesus says, when that is the case, that's in itself adultery. See? Because the person is already in an emotional connection with somebody else and is divorcing this one in order to marry this one. And that in itself is wrong. You're already in an adulterous heart. Why? Because while you're married to this person, you are already developing this other relationship. And that is what had happened, with Herod and the affair that he was having, and that John the Baptist was criticizing him, and that cost him his head, right? He divorced his wife in order to marry the lover. And John the Baptist criticized that, he died for it. And now, because that was kind of like the context, now the religious leaders wanted to put Jesus in a similar situation. But let's go to the third principle in light of what Rachel mentioned. And the third principle is that divorce is the lesser of two evils. It's not desirable. We wish we didn't have to take that option. But when you have to choose between two options that are both bad, which one do you take? And this is where the expression, it is the lesser of two evils. We are not saying that divorce is the ideal or that God wishes you had to go through that. But when you are in certain situations where you have to choose between the lesser of two evils, when divorce is the lesser of two evils, then you go for it. So let's take a look at it. This is the Apostle Paul talking in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. We talked about 1 Corinthians in the past. We learned that the apostle had received this letter with a bunch of questions from Christians in the city of Corinth. They had questions about marriage and about being single and about sexuality and about all these things. Because they live in a port city with prostitution was like all over the place, and it was a very sexually immoral place. So these people started following Jesus and they started learning about salvation, and suddenly it's like they want to know all these things. And one question that they asked was this: now, is it okay for me to get divorced? And some people were saying, look, I became a follower of Jesus, but my spouse didn't. And the moment I started following Jesus, my marriage is just complete hell, because my spouse is completely against me and against God, doesn't want to do anything with God and Christianity, and my spouse now wants to divorce me. So what should I do? Should I divorce my spouse because doesn't want to do anything with God and with me as a Christian anymore? Or I need to stay? So these were some of the questions that we're dealing with. So he starts giving an answer. And this is what he says in chapter 7. Let me move this here. Okay. It says, to the married, I give this command. He says, not I, but the Lord. He clarifies, okay, so me giving you this command is the Lord. I'm telling you what I learned from God himself, okay? This is what I received from Jesus. So I'm going to tell you. A wife must not separate from her husband, but if she does, she must remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband. And a husband must not divorce his wife. So the first thing he's saying is like, look, let's paint the picture clear here. If you're in a situation that is not healthy and you need to separate, separate. But with what goal? So that you may be reconciled. It's just a way of, it's a methodology to, okay, let's become separated temporarily so we can work on our issues with the goal of becoming reconciled. But the goal is that you don't divorce. Do everything in your power to solve the situation. And that is where separation is almost like when you break your arm. You know, you break your arm, what do the doctors do? They put a cast so that you will temporarily stop using your arm. What for? So it can heal. And after the bone heals, now they remove the cast so you can start using it again. That is what Paul is saying is the ideal. If you broke your arm of your marriage, put a cast on it, separate temporarily so it can heal so that you can be reconciled. And it goes both ways, whether it's the husband wanting to divorce the wife or the wife wanting to divorce the husband, you know, it's like try to save the marriage as much as possible. You know, that's kind of like the essence of it. But then he continues. So what does God think? What does Jesus think about this? It's like, okay, please don't get divorced, work as much as you can on it so you can be reconciled. But then to the other situations that are going on, he says, to the rest, I say this. And now he clarifies, I, not the Lord. And this is a very important clarification because he's going to tell you something that Jesus didn't answer. So now he's going to give you what is his opinion about the situation. And why is this important? Because before we keep reading, we have to acknowledge that not all situations are situations that the Bible addressed, like this one. So there are moments like Paul is doing, saying, look, I cannot quote your Bible verse, I cannot quote you Jesus, but the best thing I can do is to give you my mature opinion as a servant of God. And this is what I advise you do. See, what is the situation and what is the advice? He says, if any brother, meaning a follower of Jesus, okay? If any follower of Jesus and a Christian has a wife who is not a Christian, she doesn't believe in Christ, she doesn't believe in Jesus, she doesn't believe in God, and she's willing to live with him, then he must not divorce her. And the same thing, if a woman has a husband who is not a believer, does not believe in Jesus, she is, he is not, and he is willing to live with her, then she, the Christian, should not try to divorce him. But he says, if the other way around, if the one that wants to divorce you is the unbeliever, if your unbelieving husband or wife that does not believe in God, does not believe in Jesus, does not want to do anything with this stuff, is annoyed by it, it's just hates what you become, and that person wants to leave you, he says, let him do so. A believing man or woman is not bound in such circumstances anymore. God has called us to live in peace. So it's like, wow, he's saying, look, I know this is complex. Jesus didn't mention anything about it, but this is what I think you need to do. If you are following God, don't pursue divorce. Stay with the situation because you never know what God will do. But If your spouse wants to leave you and you've been trying to do things and nothing is working, the spouse still wants to leave you, then let that person go. You're not bound to that person anymore. You're not bound in any of those circumstances. At the end, he says, this is the bottom line. God has called us to live in peace. So if the lesser of two evils is divorce, and that is going to enable you then to live in peace, then go for that lesser of two evils. This passage is very significant because it says so many things. First, it tells us that if you are following God, you need to do everything in your power to work hard at your marriage so that it won't end in divorce. Because you know that God wants to restore your marriage. But at the same time, it acknowledges the hard heart of individuals. And in order to have a good marriage, you need two people that want to have a good marriage. It acknowledges there are situations in which you have to let the other person go. And in those moments where you are so conflicted because you do not know what is the right thing to do, a question that you need to be asking is, what is the way of peace? Because at the end, God calls us to peace. What's the way of peace? Because sometimes people get divorced and that only brings more enmity, because divorce is not solving anything. They think it's going to solve something, but it's not, because what they're dealing with, divorce is just a symptom. What they need to work with is the deeper things that are leading them to divorce. While in other moments, divorce is almost like the cancer that is growing in your body. As you're doing all the chemo, and it keeps growing, and suddenly the doctor says, you know what, we are going to have to amputate that arm. Because if we don't amputate that arm, it's going to spread to the rest of the body, and you don't want that. This is what you need to be thinking about. And this is what I've grown to understand throughout the years, is that the Bible never gave us a complete list of items of saying, okay, in this case, you get divorced. In this case, you don't. Rather than giving us a complete list of items, what we discover in this case is that there are some questions that the Bible doesn't address. What about this case? And what about this case? And what about this situation? And like Paul here, many times we have to say, I don't know, but my best informed opinion would be this, But at the end of the day, remember, God called you to live in peace. He does not want your whole body to get affected by the cancer that is in your arm. And if it's not responding to the treatment, go ahead and cut that arm off in order to save the rest of the body. So think of divorce as the ultimate option in order to ensure the health that you need to have. And when we realize that, suddenly it all makes sense. All of it comes together, and it's all consistent. It's not in a way that is contradicting each other. Does God hate divorce? Yes. Did God allow for divorce? Yes. Why? Because the hardening of the heart. People can be very sinful, and sinfulness can be very damaging. Therefore, I need to think of divorce as a very extreme measure that I have to take only when it's the lesser of two evils. But I'm going to do everything in my power to save that marriage, just like I'm going to do everything in my power to fight that cancer. But the moment will come in which it will be clear to me that cutting that arm off is the only option left. And rather than being a very prescriptive thing of say, well, in this case, yes, and in this case, no, it's a much more issue of a principle. And this is where, when I work with couples that come to me saying, you know, I'm about to get divorced, and that's what they're talking about. In all of my years, you know, over 10 years of working with couples, there has only been one time in which I had to sit down with a couple after the initial interviews and say, I believe you need to get divorced, and lead them through the process and end that marriage. Only one time, because it was very obvious to me. But every other time, it has turned around, except for once. And some cases were very extreme. So one of the things that I do with the couples that come and say, you know, we want to get divorced, is like, say, look, marriage was a commitment you made between you and your spouse and God. So I want you to talk to God before you make that decision, and see, is God opening that exit door for you? Or is God telling you, no, you need to try a little bit harder? And then you come to me and you tell me what you're going to do. I've never told people, no, you should not get divorced. I always tell them, you need to tell me what you should do. Because if you come to me and you say, I believe that God wants me to try harder, then I'll help you. But it's going to be your responsibility before God, right? So I like to turn people to God in that way, because God does speak to you and he gives you peace, or the lack of it, as you come with these very important decisions. So you see, these are the three things, therefore, that the Bible talks about. We can summarize like the three main principles that bring together what the Bible says about divorce. God hates divorce. Divorce is a protective measure against the destructive power of a sinful heart, and it's meant to be the lesser of two evils. With that summary, let's do this true and false, okay? Based on what we just read. True or false? Unmute your mic, and here we go. Hannah, you do the first one. Divorce was part of the original design for marriage.
False.
False, right? God did not intend that to be the case. Good. B, Brandon. God is indifferent about what a person does with his or her marriage.
False.
False. You know, God has a strong opinion about it, right? Next one. Kelly. God has allowed divorce because of the sinful condition of the human heart.
Yes.
Yeah. Jack, divorce is never a legitimate choice.
False.
False. Yeah, there are times in which it's the lesser of two evils, and you didn't intend to go through it, but it's the right thing to do. Next one, Trey. There are extreme cases when divorce is a better choice than to remain married.
I believe that's true.
Yeah, that's true. Like Jesus said, you know, he gave one example of those cases. Paul gave another example of those cases, right? There are extreme cases when divorce is a better choice than to remain married. It's never the ideal choice, but it's better choice. And Eli, God desires for a married Christian to seek reconciliation in marriage.
True.
True, that's what Paul said, right? It's like, if you are married and you are following Jesus, separate with the goal of being reconciled. Okay, so all of these things we can say, okay, these are true. The Bible talks about them, and that shapes the conviction. That's why, you see, thinking of divorce as the first option, or the second option, or the third option, you know, is not it. Or thinking that divorce is the forbidden option and it's never right or legitimate, it's also not it. To think of divorce as the last possible option, yeah, it's just an emergency exit. That's all it is. With that in mind, now what I would like to turn the study to is to understand how you can then build a divorce-proof marriage. Now, the first approach was to simply understand how people think differently about this topic and what the Bible really say about this topic, so we can kind of put our minds and our thoughts align with what is truly biblical. But now that we have built that foundation, let's move to this question, because that's the goal of this session, right? Like, how are you protecting your marriage from divorce? Well, how do you build a divorce-proof marriage? In order to answer this last part of the study, I want you to think of marriage as a tooth and of divorce as a cavity. That's the picture you're going to have in your mind, okay? And the difference between a couple that does not have oneness and one that has oneness, the couple that ends up divorcing in contrast to the one that has oneness, is because one let the cavity unaddressed, while the one that had oneness was very intentional in making sure that the teeth had no cavities. Let's go with the illustration to really understand how this works. You can unmute your mics because I'm going to be asking questions as we go through this part right now. Okay, so that's the tooth right there, nice and clean. What is the best thing to make sure that you have no cavities ever growing in your teeth?
Brush your teeth.
Right, very simple. Brush your teeth. Keep it clean, right? Brush the teeth and make sure that what you eat, is healthy. Don't be eating lots of sugar and drinking lots of Coke. That's gonna damage your teeth. So simple, be preventative, brush your teeth. What happens if you start having a toothache and it's like, it's hurting a little bit? What should you do right away?
Go see a dentist.
Right away. Because, the dentist will be able to look at the situation and tell you exactly what it is and solve it immediately. Right there, the pain will be removed. You will be fine. You will be able to chew again. Things will be great. But what happens if you are some of those people that hate dentists and you say, oh, it's hurting, but I'll just take an aspirin or something. It's like, it's hurting, but I can just get used to it. It's not that bad. And you keep waiting and waiting until the pain is really unbearable. What is more likely to end up happening?
The problem will persist to the point, or it'll spread to the point that you have to lose a tooth. Like it'll either come out, you have to get it extracted.
Yeah, it will hurt so much that, yep, it will have to get extracted. And I apologize to any dentist watching this video because that dentist in the drawing looks like evil, like, ha, 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 I got your tooth out. That's the only one I found, sorry. But I remember that at one time I had a friend that, was having a terrible toothache and it was really like, okay, now inflamed, I said, I need to take you to the dentist. And he didn't want to go to the dentist. So I pushed him. And so I took him to my dentist. And to my surprise, the dentist did all the x-rays and everything and said, hey, you know what? So this is too late. We have to remove that tooth. So the whole thing was, the removal. But he couldn't remove the tooth right away because his blood pressure was too high. So he had to wait a couple of days, give him some medicine to kind of lower his blood pressure, and then came back, and then he was able to remove the tooth. So I kept thinking, why did you wait so long? Now it's too late. This is how divorce works. And this is how you protect your marriage from ever getting to the point of seriously thinking about divorce. Let me explain it in more detail. Keeping the imagery of the tooth and the decay and the roots, let me explain to you how the struggle with divorce happens and how I work with the couples, because most of the couples that I work throughout the years are couples that are in crisis and are considering, to one degree or another, divorce. Fewer couples are the couples that come because they want to be trained to get married. Most of the couples is a corrective issue rather than a preventive issue. So this is what I've learned throughout all of these years, and this has helped me tremendously in working with these couples to kind of give them perspective. In order to understand this section, you have to remember a little bit what we covered when we talk about friendship in marriage and how this develops. Okay, so we're going to revisit something that we covered in that session. Typically, the relationship in your marriage started at a friendship stage. You met, you got to know each other, you kind of like each other, and you started developing the friendship. And that friendship was nurtured with, conversation, doing good things, having fun, enjoying each other's company. With time, couples tend to sacrifice that friendship, and that is the first level where the cavity begins to form. They stop watering that friendship, so it starts feeling like it's withering. They start feeling distant. They no longer talk. Everything is just about business, the kids, the payments, the houses, but they're not connecting. So when they're not connecting, the spouse starts connecting emotionally with another friend outside the relationship and becomes vulnerable because now it's emotionally watering another little plant over there rather than watering his own. This dimension is one dimension in which the first cavity starts showing up. How do you make sure that that cavity is removed? If you start feeling distant from your spouse and you have lost that connection, at that very moment, you're having a toothache. At that very moment, you have to go to the dentist and make sure that that cavity is removed. How is it removed? The way you work with this dimension of friendship, you have to understand that this is about emotions. And emotions go up and down very easily. So this dimension is very easy to address. If you start feeling distant because you're not spending much time together, you're not talking much together, there's conflict, you have not talked, you have not really shared how you're really feeling, and you're keeping it in. All of this dimension goes with emotions up and down. The only thing that you need to do is to go and start watering it. Solve the conflict, talk about the situation, do things you enjoy together, start giving each other attention, feed the romantic life, etc. What's amazing is that the moment you do it, you know what happens? It's like, oh, I feel close again. Oh, I feel happy again. Hey, I like you again. And it only demanded for you to give that attention. This is how that works. I have this little plant in my office that I use when we do one-on-one sessions, but it's a flor. The flor is the Spanish word for flower, but it's also a name, Flor. So I named her Flor. And this little flower has a little button on the bottom here, and you push it, and the flower is like, and goes like this, And And then you start pushing and it's like, oh, yay, all happy again, you know? And it's kind of like fun to play with. It's like, yeah, and then, ah. So I will always show the couple that little flower and say, this is your friendship right now, okay? So you start watering it and it's feeling like, oh. But guess what happens when you start putting water in that little plant? It goes like, oh, happy again. Easy. You don't have to suffer much. If your friendship is suffering and is making you feel distant and you have a toothache there, go and address it, piece of cake, no problem. You will be able to start feeling better very quickly. But there's another dimension of the relationship, which is trust. Trust is when we became more vulnerable with each other. And I started sharing things with you that, you know, I hadn't shared with anybody else. I started entrusting you with things that were valuable. And suddenly I realized I could depend on you. Not only we were enjoying our friendship, but we were now developing this trust, this closeness. And that trust was part of the foundation of your marriage. But what happens along the marriage is that trust can be broken. That trust can be betrayed. And when that trust is broken, a new cavity starts forming there. And it hurts. And you have that toothache. And you feel distant. You have lost that connection. And now you're wondering, where is this marriage gonna go? Trust is different from friendship because it's not about emotions. Trust is about facts. So when trust has been broken and you feel distant, you don't solve it by just watering the friendship and say, hey, let's be nice to each other again. And let's go to the movies together. Hey, let's go and do this together. That's not gonna take care of that cavity. It will not take care of the cavity also by saying, sorry, I will never do it again. It's not recovered with a promise. Trust is only recovered with facts. If your spouse lied to you and you realize, hey, you lied to me, that trust was broken. And now you're wondering, can I trust you? Are you gonna tell me the truth next time? Are you gonna lie to me again? If you found that your spouse was being flirtatious with another person and you found texts that were, you know, something questionable, now you are gonna wonder, is my spouse gonna be flirtatious when I'm not around? You are wondering whether you can trust your spouse. You found porn in your spouse's computer, and now you're wondering, you've been doing these things behind my back. Can I trust you? If I ask you about these things, will you tell me the truth? There are so many different things that break that trust in the relationship. And one of the things that you need to understand is that if trust has been broken in your relationship, the only way to recover that trust is by showing yourself trustworthy. And in order to show yourself trustworthy, that's going to take time. But that time is unpredictable. In other words, if I lied to you about how I spend the money and then I come to you and say, sorry, I lied to you because that was not true. This is what I really did. You're going to be shocked, you know, and next time I tell you something, you're going to be wondering. But if I'm telling you the truth consistently, suddenly you're not going to be wondering about that anymore. Because you know, I learned the lesson and I'm not lying to you anymore. Easy. But if the lack of what broke the trust was an affair, I cheated on you, I was flirtatious intentionally, now that's not going to take a week or two of showing yourself trustworthy. That may take a year. It may take 5 years. You do not know. But the only thing that you know is that the only way to recover that trust and remove that cavity is showing yourself trustworthy until your spouse is able to feel that the person can trust you again. And at that moment, the cavity is gone. So the best thing to do is that if trust has been broken in your relationship, you talk about it, solve the situation, and then create accountability. I remember the couple that was struggling because the husband was struggling with porn and stuff. They had to start doing lots of things. The person ended up closing Facebook apps and closing accounts and things. They created passwords, and they put an accountability software in the computers and phones, and then every day they would sit down and their wife would ask him, "So what about today?" And they created a very tight system to make sure that that was not affecting the relationship anymore, and that worked. Eventually, that area healed, and then they were able to overcome that. You never know what the situation, how the situation is going to affect the trust, but the thing that you know is that to recover it, you have to take all the time you need to take, consistently showing yourself trustworthy, and then you will gain it back. Now, there's a third element of the relationship, and this is commitment. Now, commitment was when I realized, hey, I enjoyed you. Hey, I can trust you. Why don't we get married? And we decided to tie the knot, and we got married. What changed the relationship from the friendship you had that was, very trusting, to marriage? What changed it? Was simply a decision. It was based on commitment, saying, you know what, I marry you. Okay, I marry you too. Great, let's get married. Done. That was no longer about emotions. That was no longer about the facts. Suddenly, this dimension of the relationship became something rooted differently. It's rooted on that decision that you made of, with you until I die. But what happens is that when these cavities go unattended and you don't address them, and they are there for a long time, you run the risk, just like your tooth, that cavity can start advancing until it reaches the root. You know how painful it is to have a tooth which root is infected? It's very painful. So painful that at that moment, there's only one thing that you want. You don't care about saving the tooth. You don't care about how much you have to pay. There's only one thing that you want. What do you think that is?
Pain relief.
Yeah. Get rid of this pain. I don't know what you need to do. I just cannot stand it anymore. I cannot live another day with this pain. Please remove this pain from me. I don't care if I have to lose it. I don't want any more pain. That is when the couple has reached the root, and they come and they say, I don't care about saving this marriage anymore. I really don't. The only thing I want is peace. I'm just done. I'm really done. I don't care anymore. And when they say that, I can hear, like the dentist, don't save the tooth, just remove it now. How quickly can we do it? So at this point, that couple has reached the end. Their marriage is going to be removed because it reached the root. Commitment is based on volition. It's an act of the will. So as long as you can make the decision to say, it hurts, but I'm willing to go through the treatment to remove these cavities in order to save this tooth. As long as that decision is there, that cavity can be removed and that relationship can be restored. So one of the things that I'm going to ask people when they come to my office and I explain how these 3 elements of marriage, loving marriage, work to create the need for divorce, I ask them to label from 1 to 10. You know, you will see a little scale here, like a 10, and go all the way to 0. Okay, on each side, 10 all the way to 0. And I ask them, where's your pain? Okay, has it reached, how deep is it? Has it reached the root yet? And when they tell me it's a 0, it's like it reached the root. It's like I know, okay, these people are not looking for healing the tooth. They're looking for a way out. They just cannot stand it anymore. But if the person tells me a 1, that's hope. The person could have told me a 0. But if the person said a 1, it's because that person still has a glimpse of hope that this may work. So giving that exercise for them to give me the number helps them too, because they remember later throughout the treatment that they could have said a 0, but they didn't, because they really deep in their hearts, they have the desire that they could save this relationship. And to their surprises, many couples end up healing the tooth and they don't have to remove it. I remember that there was a man that wanted to learn more about God, and I explained to him, you know, what God says about salvation, and show him what the Bible said about relationship with God and what Jesus had done for him, and he was so ready. He said, this is what I want. And he prayed that day. He opened his heart to God and he said, would you save me? And that man was transformed. He was just, he had peace. He was so excited. So then he and his wife, both of them came to believe in Jesus and started following Jesus. So we started meeting to do discipleship, to teach them more about what the Bible says about their salvation and building on that. And as they were growing, you know, the second session, he said, Pastor Pablo, I need to talk to you in private. So we went to had lunch together, and he said, you know, I never thought I was going to tell you this early, but I have to confide something in you. All of my life, I've been married for, you know, several years, like over 20 years. All of my kids are adults. So like a long marriage, right? All of my life, I have had another woman in my life. I have having an affair all of my life with the same woman during all my marriage. And I never told anyone. My wife doesn't know. Nobody knows. And he says, now I am following God. I believe in Jesus. And I feel that he wants me to stop that and walk away from that. And I do not know what I need to do. So I said what the Bible says. I told him, look, you cannot simply stop the relationship and pretend that your marriage is going to grow from there. You first have to confess that to your spouse and ask for forgiveness. And she has the option to forgive you or not. But if this marriage is going to be saved, you have to go through that door. And then you have to talk to the other woman and end that relationship and tell her why you are ending it. And now you are following God, and you are doing it because you love God now. Can you imagine how hard it was for him to have to do that? Talk to both women? That is the hardest case I've ever worked with, where it seems so hopeless. It's like, how would a wife hear that and say, okay, I'll stay with you and work on this marriage, when she realizes that all of their marriage has been fake? So We walked together. I flew to their home when we set the meeting to talk about these things. And hard, but through the whole process, you know what happened? They forgave each other for all these things that have happened throughout the years. They started healing the friendship, healing the trust. And then the next step came when they had to meet with all the adult kids and share with them what had happened and how they had decided to continue the relationship. And today they are still together. They have a godly marriage. God really became the center. They really healed from these things. God really healed their own hearts. And what seemed completely impossible at the beginning, God was able to do. Why? Because they had a little bit left of commitment there, that they said, we want to heal the friendship, heal the trust. The cavity is not deep enough. The tooth can be saved. Those are the stories that you live for, right? Those are the stories that you hope will bring healing to people's lives. So I tell you that story for one reason, and that is for you to understand that no matter how painful and horrible the cavity may feel, if you're committed to go through the treatment, God can heal the pain and can heal the wound and can heal the marriage. But I'm also, as I told you earlier, have the conviction that there are some situations where you have to remove the tooth, and that is the right thing to do. But that is very extreme. So here, now you understand how the dynamics in divorce happened and the factors that come, that come together to cause you to want to pursue divorce. Therefore, I would like to remind you of this verse from Proverbs 27. It says this: he who is full loads honey, but to the hungry, even what is better tastes sweet. This is a very poetic passage of wisdom. It's just using an illustration to make a point. He says, look, what happens if you have eaten and you are so full, and somebody comes to you with your favorite dessert and shows it to you and says, would you like some? What are you gonna do? You're gonna say, oh, no, thank you, because I'm full. Once you are full, even your favorite dessert, you're gonna reject. But what happens if you haven't eaten for a week? And I show you this bread that is all moldy. And I say, you know, the only thing I have is this bread, but it's moldy. You know what you will do? You will say, I don't care. I need to eat something. And you go and you start eating something that you never thought that you would ever put in your mouth. The one who's full loads honey, but when the one who's hungry, even that which is bitter tastes sweet. You know what this verse is talking about? It's talking about marriage. It's saying, look, are you afraid that your spouse may cheat on you or walk away from you? Are you afraid that one time in your life you will have to suffer infidelity, or that your spouse will stop loving you? Are you afraid of that? Well, this is what you need to remember. If you have a marriage relationship that is full, nothing will be satisfying. Nothing else, because you're already satisfying your marriage. But if your marriage is starving, the most unthinkable person may become someone that your spouse will go after. So the best approach to build a divorce-proof marriage is by keeping a full tummy, according to this verse. Or using my imagery, the verse approach to building a divorce-proof marriage is to brush your teeth. Okay? Make sure that whenever the friendship is feeling like it's growing weak, you are feeling disconnected, you immediately bring the connection back. Brush those teeth. If the trust was broken, immediately bring it together. But even better, don't break it. Don't do anything that will break the trust. And if you do, go ahead and take care of that cavity right away. Don't wait. To make sure that that commitment is solid. Because if you leave the friendship and the trust to get cavities and you leave them alone for a long period of time, you may get to the point in which it hurts so much that you don't care about that marriage anymore. The only thing you care is for someone to remove that tooth. So how do you build a divorce-proof marriage? By keeping your friendship and your trust in the best possible shape. That's how you do it. So now you know how people think about divorce, what the Bible teaches about it, and how proactive and intentional we are to protect these areas of our marriage so that they will never get to the point of pain that will lead to divorce. So let's conclude this section with true and false. Here we go. This is part of your homework to give you kind of assessment and food for your conversation later. My spouse and I have a weak friendship. My friendship with my spouse is deeper today than at the beginning of our marriage. I'm satisfied with the level of friendship that my spouse and I have in our marriage. Friendship has been lost in our marriage and we have been unable to rebuild it. Next section. My spouse and I have a weak romantic life. My romantic life with my spouse is deeper today than at the beginning of our marriage. I am satisfied with the level of romance that my spouse and I have in our marriage. Romance has been lost in our marriage and we have been unable to regain it. Next section. My spouse and I, this says something different. My spouse is trustworthy in all relevant areas to our marriage. I am trustworthy in all areas relevant to our marriage. There is no trust in our marriage. Trust has been broken in our marriage and we have been unable to regain it. And the last section, I entered this marriage thinking of divorce as an option if things did not work out. I am 100% committed to my marriage. My spouse is 100% committed to our marriage. My level of commitment to my marriage is weak. I think of divorce as an easy way out of my marriage. Sometimes I mention the option of divorce to my spouse. I do not think of divorce as an option in my marriage. I am committed to do everything in my power to build a divorce-proof marriage. And that's the end of the section. Okay, so with this, we conclude session 9 of understanding how to build a divorce-proof marriage. And as we conclude this time, I would like to just spend the next 3 minutes, give you a chance to tell me what is one thing that you take from this lesson today. What is one thing that you take from this lesson? Okay, so unmute your mic and share with us if there's something that is really there. Now, if there's nothing on the top of your mind, then you don't have to say anything, but share with us. Unmute your mic and tell us.
I'll go first.
Yeah, Hannah?
The one thing that I would take with me today is the emergency exit.
Uh-huh. Yeah. How does picture help you?
That there is there allowed, but it's only for very emergency. So I will not think of the exit as an option to get out.
Right. Yeah. And when people think of it as an exit rather than emergency exit, typically whenever they have arguments, for instance, it's like it comes out all the time. It's like, I should divorce you, or they talk about it as if it's an easy option to take. So that creates so much hurt and also undermines trust, because it's like, are you really going to divorce me? Are you going to, so whenever it becomes a threat like that. But whenever you think of it as an emergency exit, suddenly it's like you don't even mention it anymore. It's not part of your vocabulary, because it forces you to have to deal with things so you can grow rather than take the easy way out. So good. I'm glad that imagery helped you. Anybody else? What do you take home from this session today?
I think for me, as you were talking, just one of the things that it reminded me of is I had some friends who were going through a really hard time in their marriage last year, and they actually did have to like physically separate for 6 months. But now they're seeing not like the fruit of the separation, but during that 6 months, they both were attending counseling separately to kind of like work on their different issues they had. And just this week, my friend was telling me a story and how her husband responded and how he was able to be like, oh, I know we're fighting about this one thing, but I think you're actually feeling this other thing right now. Like maybe we should talk about that. And just like his emotional growth because of how much effort he put in during that 6 months of the separation. So it was kind of like, for them at least, like it was talking about in 1 Corinthians, like the separation is what helped, because that's what made him think, oh, I have to be really serious. Like I have to take this seriously.
Yeah.
And I need to work on myself. And so when you were talking about how Paul was saying like separate for a while to come back together, it made me think about them and how like their marriage is in a much better place today because they took that time to really focus on on the few issues and then come back together after those have been more worked on.
Yeah, and it helps to realize, if they're together already in a toxic environment, that toxicity is still kind of like in their system, and they just, as long as they remain there, they're creating a toxic environment. So the separation can eliminate that toxicity and then starts helping them, especially if they are getting help, helping them then start changing the behaviors that create toxicity. So when they come together, they're no longer contributing to that toxic environment anymore. But it's really, in all of our case, be so intentional that you never have to get to that point, right?
Yeah.
Or even separation is even needed. Because many of these things is really amazing how they can be addressed and talked about and solved, and conflicts can take a good direction if we address them before things become worse, right? Okay, so I hope that the training was insightful and helpful, and most of all, transformational for all of you. Remember that at the core of oneness is that your marriage is a relationship between you, your spouse, and God. So the best thing that you can do to grow in oneness is grow closer to God. Remember the video we saw at the beginning? The guy said, I started growing closer to God, my wife started growing closer to God, and then we start growing closer to each other. And their experience is the truth experience of anyone in that journey, because this is what oneness is. So I encourage you in that way. If you want to focus growing in your marriage, focus growing in your relationship with God. And the second thing I want to say is that there's a whole session that I did not include in this training because it's a detoxing session. This is the session that I do with couples that are already in struggles, that may be thinking about divorce and need to detox first, and deals with roots of bitterness. Because whenever friendship is distance and trust has been broken, there are lots of things that you need to forgive. And because you have not forgiven them, you yourself are being toxic within you, and you are contributing to a toxic environment in your relationship. And until you get rid of those roots of bitterness, you will continue to create a toxic environment. So the only way to reduce that toxicity is by dealing with the roots of bitterness. So if you are in a stage in your life in which you know there are things that you have not forgiven, whether it be about other people or about your spouse, then you need to let me know, because we will do this session one-on-one with you privately to make sure that we do this detox. And we will learn what the Bible says about bitterness and what the Bible says about how to get rid of it. And then we will do the exercise to help you get rid of it, and your life will be transformed from it. But you let me know if that is something that you need, okay? But I want you to know that as an extra session that is part of the training. So with this, then we conclude the training on oneness. Remember, we will follow up with one-on-one sessions. I'll contact you, set an appointment. And we had one couple married throughout the training, another couple getting married after the training in July, right? So I hope that the wedding goes all well and all the plans that you will focus on. So have a great evening, and we'll stay in contact then throughout the week, okay? So God bless you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Hello.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Pablo.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Hi, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.